talk about should sound substantially familiar to you because this is the math that we did on Friday. Can everyone see my slide over here? We're getting ready to talk about the appraisal process. And again, I know we do CMAs, but we steal from appraisers. So these are the processes that appraisers would go through. Do you remember the sales comparison approach? I want to find out. So don't shake your head yes if you don't. All right? What's another name for the sales comparison approach? It's the way we do our CMA, and it's also referred to as the market data approach. Do you remember that? Sales comparison, market data, and the way we do our CMA is all the same. It's the most likely one that's going to be used on what type of properties? Single-family residential and what? And vacant land. Don't forget that as well. Perfect, perfect. I like it. The cost approach. The cost approach had that weird formula to it because it was going to be the depreciated value of the improvement plus the land value equals value. And we're most likely going to use the cost approach. Be careful about what comes out of your mouth. The cost approach, what type of properties are we going to use that on? Unique properties. Good thing you got it right, because if you didn't, I was going to have to tell that lame joke again, all right? Unique properties. And then the income capitalization approach that had the formula NOI divided by cap rate equals value. Do you remember what type of properties that was on? That was income producing properties. Thank you for not saying commercial to any of those, because commercial could fall into a couple of those categories, couldn't it? Fantastic. That's right where I need you to be on that. And then let me remind you on each of these approaches, take notes as you feel necessary, but some of this clearly would have come up in your map. Sales comparison approach, comparing the subject property, and the subject property is perfect, Ebony. So when will we adjust the subject property?
Never.
We will never adjust the subject property. We're going to find comps. How many comps would you recommend that I try to find? 3 if possible. More is better. But let's try and get at least 3 comps. Comps are comparable properties that have sold. That sound about right?
Yes.
Why do we use sold properties? Because they're market what? Facts. How about listing price? Is the listing price a market fact? No, that's just someone's opinion of what we're trying to get. Typically and historically speaking, listing prices are typically what? Higher than the closed properties. I know that's not always the case. But historically speaking, that has been the case. Comp should be as similar to the subject property as possible. I'm going to slow down here for just a moment. I want to take what we've learned today, and I want to turn it into a test question, okay? When we're talking about picking comps, do you remember on Friday, we can adjust for things. Is it okay to pick a comp that's a little bit bigger than the subject property?
Yes.
I think that's okay because we can adjust on square footage, right? Do you think it's okay to pick one that's maybe a little bit older in years than the subject property? Yeah, but I mean, don't compare a new home to a old home. But if they're within a few years, I think that's okay. Is it okay to compare one that has a 1-car garage and a 2-car garage? We can adjust for that. Is it okay to compare 2 that are in similar neighborhoods? Yeah, don't compare my neighborhood to Lockmere or anything like that. But having said that, if they're similar neighborhoods, I think that would be okay. You with me so far? How about this? What I'm telling you is, you need to be prepared on the exam to pick good comps. So tell me what the problem with this is. You're looking at 3 or 4 different potential comps. They all sold for between 175 and 183. However, one of them sold for 145, and then you read the notes and realize that it was someone that had to be transferred with their job and they had to sell the house quickly. Is that a good comp or not?
No.
Defend your answer. Why is that not a good comp, Brad?
You want someone who's a seller who's willing to sell because he wants to sell, not because he has to sell.
How do we describe those buyers and sellers earlier? They need to be well-informed and typically motivated. If there is some motivation out there, and listen, for test purposes, think about this. If they have to move because of a job and they sold it cheaper, that is not indicative of market value, right? If they had to sell quickly because of health, if they had to sell quickly because they were going to get foreclosed, if it was in fact a foreclosure sale, these are not indicative of market value. Does that make sense to you? Which means they're not good comps, because comps, what we're looking for is market value. Technically, as agents, we're looking for probable sell price.
So I know you're just giving an example, but would that really be listed somewhere where
Well, here's what would happen, in reality, what happens is, as I'm looking through the MLS, when I'm trying to evaluate a property, I look and I see a lot of information. And so on one of them, I'll see that, I pull up 10 potential comps, and I see that they all sold within a fairly tight price range. And then I look for one that sold for outside that price range. I'm already skeptical. And so sometimes I'll go in and I'll look at it and I'll see, while these were on the market for 90 days, this one was only on the market for 1 day, but it sold less than everything else did. Typically, that lets me know that it was either a distressed sale or someone who had something they were trying to accomplish. And because it's an outlier,
You just kick it out.
I kick it out.
Yeah, but it's not like real estate agents will know that. or-
Sometimes we will, and we will put a note in there to say not to be used for common purposes. For example, when I sold new homes, every once in a while we would sell one of our new homes to somebody that worked for the company. And if we sold it to somebody that worked for the company, we'd sell it at a 20% discount if you were an employee of the company. We would put that in the MLS and we would put a note on it, not to be used for common purposes. Does that make sense? A lot of times you can look for clues in the MLS and you can figure it out. The appraisers actually have the same information to work off of as we do. They use our MLS for this information. Okay. Adjustments are made to the comps. We don't adjust the subject property. What else does it say there? CMA is based on this approach. Remember this economic rental substitution, right? And then best approach for residential and land. Anything new on that slide? Yeah, this section is going to go quickly. This is going to go quickly. Ooh, I didn't put this word down there, but you actually already know the definition of this. Do you see the first bullet point that's on that list? An arm's length transaction. When I say an arm's length transaction, here's what I mean. A transaction that does show no bias. A transaction where the parties are typically motivated. Does this sound familiar to you?
Yes.
Yeah. And the way I remember arm's length transaction is, I think about it this way. If the transaction is at arm's length, it will produce market value. But what if you're inside the hood? That's the way I look at it. If you're inside the hood, for example, if I'm selling a property to my son, I own my property outright. It's worth $175,000. I could give it to my son, right? But I want him to have the joy of having a mortgage. So I sell it to him for $120,000. Is there anything illegal about me selling to him for $120,000? But is it indicative of market value? Because he was inside the hood. It wasn't at arm's length. Does that make sense to you? Well-informed, typically motivated, unbiased. They all mean the same thing. Comp should be as similar to the subject property as possible. Give me an example of what I mean by being as similar as possible. When do I want the sale of the comp to have taken place? Less than 6 months, as close as possible. Yesterday would be ideal, but definitely within the last 6 months rule of thumb. Okay? How about the size? I want it to be the exact same size, but can I tolerate a little room for error? Okay. How about in the same neighborhood, ideally? You want me to tell you what the ideal comp is? Next door, sold yesterday, exact same floor plan. That's the ideal comp. That never exists. So what you try to get is as similar to that as possible. Feel good about that? Perfect. Recently sold 3 comps, fewer adjustments if possible. You remember the concept that if the comp is inferior, you're going to do what to the comp's value? You're going to increase or add. If the comp is superior to the subject property, you're going to subtract. Did you guys practice those over the weekend? Please do. You are absolutely being tested on those, and they're going to be complicated questions, but not so much so if you remember the rules and follow them, okay? And also, don't forget, I ran into someone, they were doing a few of these over the weekend, and they said, what I ended up doing, Chris, was just putting them into a chart the way you said. I said, really? That's what you did? In the end, I started doing it the way the instructor suggested, and he started getting them right. Okay, I don't know. I think there's a correlation there. We'll come back to the word correlation a little bit. There is an example of adjusting the comps in your notes. I'm not going to go over it because we did these in class, but it's good. And there's some good stuff in your notes here that I would encourage. Here's something else that this person, they're testing tomorrow night. And so he was telling me some other strategies that he did. What have I told you about these slides all along? Are the points in red important?
Yes.
Are you studying those?
Yes.
Okay, so you're going to Lessonly, you're looking at those. I know they're black and white in front of you, but make sure you go to Lessonly. So he said right here, a couple of nights before the exam, he was literally going through his slides, looking at the red bullet points and saying, Chris is telling me this stuff's important, so maybe I should treat it as important. It's a good strategy for you to start maybe this weekend. You guys still have another week or so to go before that. But you should be in good shape. Look at all these notes that are in there. Some of them are really good. That's just setting up the chart I was describing to you. And then finally finishing up the CMA approach, the informal version conducted by a real estate agent. Are you guys ever going to use the word appraisal?
No.
Are you ever going to use the word value? No, because those words are used by whom? Appraisers. You can usually indicate a range of value. It's not important that you say a specific price. Seller says, how much do you think my house is going to sell for? Mr. Seller, I believe your house is going to sell between 183 and 193 based on the market. I know that the seller's always going to say, well, then I want 193. That's fine. Are you the best? Are you turnkey ready to go? Are you willing to expose yourself to the market for a period of time? Do you understand exposure to the market is important for you being able to get retail price? I got to sell it next week. You need to be on the lower part of this range. Make sense? Yeah, this chapter is really not hard when you look at it. Refer to current and expired listings. I'm going to let you guys play a little bit right now. You're sitting there with your seller. You've created what you believe the price range is, 183 to 193. Why do you show your seller the houses that are currently on the market? They know who they're what? Remember competition being one of our vocabulary words? They know what their competition is. Do you have, first of all, do you even know what an expired listing is? Expired listing is a listing that expired because it didn't do what?
Sell.
It didn't sell within the listing agreement. Do you know why you show sellers the expired listings? Yeah, they know it's possible, and they all have something in common. They actually have one of two things in common. Most of them are overpriced. Yes, and so when you, that seller I was talking to earlier, when he wanted 240, and I knew that the properties were worth around 200, what I do is I break out the expired, and I say, let me show you what happened to other houses that they wanted 240. And you can take the expired listings and you can actually show them that there is a pushback at a certain, there's a resistance at a certain price. This is all handy information. Our MLS has all this. It can make a compelling presentation for you when you're sitting down with sellers. Keep your CMA current, and it's expected as a client level service. I am your agent. You should expect this CMA of me. And you can do it formally or you can do it informally, but I think buyers and sellers have a reasonable expectation that you should be able to do a market analysis for you. Hang on. All right, no, my CMAs. Let's move on to cost approach. Cost approach, now that you've done the math, and remember you had 3 of these for homework, okay? When I say homework, we did them in class, but hopefully you have those, because when it comes time to study for the exam, those are going to be the 3 you study, and really nothing else about the cost approach, okay? The cost approach, you have already told me it was for unique properties. Unique meaning we don't have comps that are similar. You gave me some examples of some unique properties. I'm selling an old schoolhouse. I'm selling a house of worship. I'm selling a bowling alley. I'm selling a movie theater. We don't have comps for these, okay? And they're not income-producing properties. So we use the cost approach. Historic buildings, no comps. So far, so good? Okay? And then, let me remind you of this. Do you remember that the formula for the cost approach was, listen closely, the depreciated value of the improvement. Do you remember how we did the depreciation value? I'm going to find out. We had to create, tell me the word to this definition. What is the word I'm looking for when I say, this is the cost that it would cost to rebuild that building today using today's standards. Start with the letter R.
Replacement cost.
That is, in fact, the replacement cost. Good? Once we determine the replacement cost, we realize, well, that building's not new. So we need to depreciate from that building, from that value. So what we do is we establish for that building some age, and what that age is representative of is the period of time within which it's going to have some profitable or valuable use. What's that definition? Useful life or economic life. Economic life and useful life are the same words, okay? And then I said, now we have to establish a certain age for that building. What's the word for the definition that says, this is the age the building appears to be given its upkeep. The age the building appears to be, that's the effective age, okay? Effective age over economic life times replacement cost will tell you, of course, the depreciated value of the building. You okay with that?
Can you say again the loss of economic life?
Yeah, the effective age over the economic life. So you have replacement cost times the effective age over the economic life. Yeah. That will tell you how much that building has depreciated. Okay. Now, let's get to something a little bit new. Let's get to something a little bit new. Do you agree with me that in the cost approach, the depreciated value of the improvement plus land value equals value? Is everybody with me to that extent? And do you remember the problem? I actually showed you how to do this depreciation right here. We divide it by the economic life, we multiply it by the effective age, and that will tell us how much the property has depreciated. Then, of course, we subtract that from the replacement cost. So, now that we have that number, the question is, who comes up with this? Who comes up with the effective age? Who comes up with the economic life? By the way, on the test, you do not have to do this. Okay? We will give it to you on the exam. If we want you to know, we will give it to you. But have you ever thought about the fact that some appraiser out there had to say that building's worth, has an economic life of 60 years? Have you ever thought about some appraiser has to say it has an effective age of 12 years, for example? Would you agree that this type of method of depreciation is somewhat, what, that starts with the letter S? It's somewhat subjective, isn't it? I don't care how good the appraiser is. To some extent, what we refer to as the age-life method is somewhat subjective. Would you agree to that? I want you to make a little chart in your notes, and I want your chart to look like this. Methods of depreciation. Methods of depreciation. Methods of depreciation. Okay. There are going to be three methods of depreciation. In other words, I told you that we're looking for the depreciated life of or depreciated value of a property. There's three methods we can do it. You'll only do one math problem, and that's the math problem that you've seen. Okay? That's the first method of depreciation, and we refer to that as the age/life method, the age over life method. The one that you're going to do the math problem on is known as the age-life method of depreciation. Does that make sense? Based on the way we did it? And what do we say the concern is with the age-life method of depreciation? It's somewhat subjective. Okay? That's why we don't do it. We'll leave this to appraisers. All right, let me tell you what the second method is. But the second method, you only need to recognize by name. Matter of fact, I know for sure you're not going to have to do this on the exam. But we have a second method of depreciation referred to as the market abstraction method. Excuse me. Market abstraction method. In other words, you're abstracting something from the market. Now, here's the only note I want you to write next to market abstraction method. It's considered to be more objective than the age-life method. I'll tell you a little bit about this method if you promise not to write it down. I don't know how to do it. I'm not a professor. In the market abstraction method, think about this for just a second. In this case, what the appraiser is doing to determine how depreciation has affected buildings in the area, he looks at anything that's sold. Doesn't really care what it is. It could have been an office building, could have been a hotel, could have been anything. So what the appraiser does is figures out the land value, which you can do. I mean, you can figure out what land value in the commercial district is worth. Subtracts that from what the property sold for, and says, well, to build this building today, it would have cost this. It sold for this, and so therefore depreciation has affected this building by 2%. And then they go and apply that to other buildings in the area, and they come up with a value. Buildings in this area depreciate by 1.89%. And then they take it and apply it to the building that they're evaluating, okay? Now, here's the only thing that's important about that. Do you understand why it's considered to be more objective? It's considered to be more objective because it's telling you what the what is doing. What the market, what this local market is doing. Somebody didn't just make up the effective age or the economic life. They actually looked at the market to determine how it affected other buildings, and then they applied it to this building. Okay? You don't need to know anything about that except that it exists. And then finally, you don't really need to know that much about the next one, but we tend to test you on this next one. And the reason that we do is because there are some words that actually are important from an appraisal standpoint. The third method is referred to as the breakdown method of depreciation. Breakdown method of depreciation. You're going to have like 3 subsets of the breakdown method. Under the breakdown method, the appraiser looks at the following things. Number 1, the appraiser deducts for physical deterioration. Under the breakdown method, the appraiser will deduct for physical deterioration. That's a good word, but let me make it simple to you. Physical deterioration is normal wear and tear. Physical deterioration is normal wear and tear. I want you to look around this classroom and tell me the difference between this room right here being when it was new and the way it looks right now. Where do you see some physical deterioration?
Carpet.
I knew you were going to start with the carpets. Must be about time for us to replace the carpets. Okay. The walls are probably deemed, probably could use some painting as well. What'd you say? The HVAC. The HVAC is older today than it was the day that we installed it. It's closer to the end of its useful life. Okay? What else? I don't know. I mean, that's a great list right there. Do you understand? This is not a bad building, but it's not new any longer. Okay? Physical deterioration, normal wear and tear. Make sense? Okay? The second thing that the appraiser will deduct for is what we refer to as functional obsolescence. Functional obsolescence. Functional obsolescence. For lack of a better definition, I usually refer to functional obsolescence as time has passed the building by. Time has passed the building by. If you will keep writing, here's some examples. Outdated floor plan. Outdated wiring. Outdated plumbing. Now, for this example, it's okay if you use a house as an example. Give me an example of what I mean by an outdated floor plan. Who wants to take it on? Go ahead, Erica, you're first up.
Split level.
Okay, split, you don't make a whole lot of split levels anymore, right? Okay, you just don't see them. What else? Go ahead, Mark.
Connecting.
Say again.
2 rooms connecting.
2 rooms connected. Have you ever been in a house where you literally had to walk through one bedroom to get to another bedroom? Okay, that's outdated. It's just not functional. Okay? How about a house built in 1978? What would you say about its kitchen, other than the fact that it's ugly? I don't mean that.
It's tiny.
It's tiny. How about those closets we were talking about earlier, Daniel? 1978 house? Yeah, it's got little bitty closets. That's outdated today, right? Nothing wrong with the house. The question becomes, is this curable or incurable? Have you ever heard of something referred to as a tear down? Remember we talked about this the other day? If it's curable, then it means, you know what, I'm going to fix it, I'll use it in the current market conditions, or it's not so bad that I have to tear it down. If it's incurable, it means you might as well just tear it down. It has no more value for what it is. Okay? Functional obsolescence, does that make sense to you? Outdated wiring, think about this. If you're trying to sell an office building today that was built back in the 1970s, did it need the electrical infrastructure that you need in a building today? I mean, think about the electrical infrastructure. Think about the cabling that you would need if you're running a high-tech concern. I mean, it would just overwhelm the infrastructure. Nothing wrong with the building. The question is, can I bring it up to today's specs, or do I just tear it down and build it new? Curable versus incurable. Make sense? Okay. The third thing that goes under the breakdown method is known as external or economic obsolescence. External or economic obsolescence. External or economic obsolescence. Now here's my short definition for external obsolescence. Something has changed. Something has changed outside of the property owner's ability to control. Something has changed outside of the property owner's ability to control. In regards to curable versus incurable, external obsolescence is always what? It's always incurable. I can't do anything about it. Can you give me a couple of examples of an external obsolescence?
Like in Roanoke Rapids, it used to be all those factories and it was a bustling place, and now it's totally
Boom.
gone.
Factories closed down, and therefore nothing has as much value any longer because the buying audience is no longer there. Look at what happened in places like Detroit. Okay? Think of a place I used to teach. It had value because it had a road in front of it that hundreds of thousands of people went by every day. What if the Department of Transportation had cut off the road in front of that property? What would it have done to the value? Dropped it dramatically, and there's not a thing in the world that we could have done about it. External obsolescence. Now, let me remind you how we got here. These are just vocabulary words to you. What would a question look like? In the breakdown method of depreciation, which would be indicative of a property that had an outdated floor plan or outdated wiring plan? What's the answer? Functional obsolescence. So literally, in this case, it's just vocabulary words. These are flashcard words. Do you understand how they relate? We have to have a way of determining depreciation. Age life method, market abstraction method, which you can't understand, and then the breakdown method, which is vocabulary too. Okay? All of that under the cost approach plus the one math problem. You feel good about that? 2 potential points on the exam right there. And then finally, the income capitalization method. We literally everything you need for test purposes we talked about on Friday doing the math. So the income approach to value we've already said was for income producing buildings. Good? And income producing properties, I should say. Do you remember the formula? The net operating income divided by what? Capitalization rate equals value. Remember, Victor? Income divided by rate equals value. Is that the way you're going to do it? Okay, that's perfect. That'll be fine. And then do you remember this? Do you remember the relationship between the cap rate and the value? The higher the cap rate, the lower the value. If you need a higher return, you must buy it for less. Do you remember that? Do you remember this? Do you remember our operating statement? Our operating statement, what do we call the number that we could potentially, if I have an apartment building, what's the maximum amount of money I could possibly bring in?
Gross potential.
Gross potential? Gross potential? But I never bring in everything because some of the units occasionally are what? Vacant. Gross potential minus vacancy equals what? Gross effective. That's the money I actually touch, which is awesome. But I haven't paid anybody yet. So gross effective minus what? Expenses equals net operating income. Okay? And then in regards to net operating income, if you remember that cash flow formula, you will also remember things like this. What is not included in an operating statement to help you find net operating income?
Debt service.
The debt service. What you actually pay per month does not affect the net operating income. The net operating income has to do with the success of the building, not your capital. All this coming back to you from Friday? Perfect. That's right where I need. Okay? There's the operating statement that we went over on Friday. It's in your book on page 491. Remember talking about the gross rent multiplier? We did talk about that Friday, right? Gross rent multiplier? Good. All right, let's finish up this chapter. Let's finish up this chapter by saying this. All right, here's what you've done. Three methods of determining value. When an appraiser comes out and looks at your home, do you realize he actually does all three? The appraiser who did my property gave me an appraisal report. I'll talk about that report in just a moment. But what he did was, he looked at the sales comparison approach. There were three comps. He showed me all his adjustments, and he said, based on this, I believe the value of your property is this amount. He actually did the cost approach. He took my house and said, I believe that the economic life of your house is 67 years. He did a formula, he added back in the land value, and he said, under the cost approach, I believe that your property would be this amount. And then, going back on the second page, there's a line right in the middle of the page, and it said, houses in this neighborhood rent for about $1,800 for a house of yours. The rent multiplier in this area is this. So therefore, based on that method, we believe the value of your house was this. Okay? It's interesting, he did all three of them. But at the end of the day, my house was a single-family home in a single-family neighborhood. Which one do you think he blessed you? Which method, which approach to value do you think that the appraiser ultimately came down to on my house? Sales comparison CMA approach. Why? Because it was single-family residential. We had a ton of comps on my particular property. I want you to write down two definitions of the word reconciliation. I want you to write down two definitions of the word reconciliation. Definition number one. The evaluation of the three valuation methods. The evaluation of the three valuation methods. Now, can someone explain that to me? Go ahead.
Because you're reconciling, you're going to be comparing things, so if we use three different methods to come up with a value to the property, it's good to compare those to a even better price.
Yeah. You could have said, Ebony, well, it's just what I just did right before I asked the question, wasn't it? Do you remember me saying that he went through all three? And then he looked at it and said, well, the sales comparison approach would be the most appropriate on this house because it's single-family residential. Yep, you're looking at three approaches, whichever one's most appropriate for this property, that's what I'm going to apply. Does that make sense to you? Then you sometimes hear the word reconciliation used for this as well. Sometimes you hear the word correlation for this next one, but you'll often hear reconciliation used for this as well. So here it comes. Write it down exactly as I say it, please. The weighted, W-E-I-G-H-T-E-D, the weighted averaging of the three comparable properties when using what approach? The CMA. The weighted averaging of the three comparable properties using the CMA or the sales comparison approach. Now, you want me to tell you what the key word in that sentence is? The weighted averaging. So do you remember, if you have three comps, using the sales comparison approach, you have three comps. Wouldn't it be weird if they all just happen to be the exact same number? Now, as a real estate agent, I'm going to say this. Mr. Seller, I think your home's going to sell between 183 and 192. But remember, an appraiser has to come up with one number. So what they do is not an averaging. An averaging would be adding the three together and dividing by 3.